Well, thank you very much, Richard and the ABC. It's really an honor for me to be able to join you and give the Andrew Olle Media Lecture and have the opportunity also to talk about some of the challenges facing our industry, both with our friends at the ABC and with many other colleagues and friends here in Sydney. Just looking through the names of some of the others who have given this lecture over the past more than 2 decades now, and a couple of them are with us tonight, it really reminds me of the range of talent and innovation that we've come to associate with Australia. That despite everything that Richard Glover told me at dinner, but you know, I've learned to contextualize that. Investigative reporters, dynamic television personalities, the leaders of some digital startup media companies, and also some of the globe-straddling media enterprises that Australia's produced. We have plenty to talk about and learn from each other. For the New York Times, Australia has become both a more compelling story and a more compelling market. That's partly because you're also an English-speaking former British colony that confronts issues like those the United States has: guns and immigration, the rise of China, and also the influence of some right-wing populists, with responses that maybe somewhat mercifully for you, do not always resemble ours. We've also been building a team of journalists in Australia led by my colleague Damien Cave, a veteran of our national and international reporting staffs. They're producing stories about Australia that we hope the rest of the world wants to read, and also looking for new ways to connect Australians to our coverage of the United States and the rest of the world. Unlike some of our international competitors, as we think about a global strategy, we're not trying to create a hodgepodge of a lot of local websites around the world. We're aiming to create a unified global report that highlights the most impactful journalism for and about an international readership. Damien and his team here are on the cutting edge of that project. And as members of the news media, we also face a set of common challenges that don't have any easy solutions. We're not yet close to seeing the end of the upheaval and the disruption of many legacy news providers, both by new media and especially by tech platforms. And now we're confronted with a very different kind of threat. An American president and his close allies who treat reporters as enemies of the people, and that with no attribution to Stalin or Mao. President Trump expresses aggressive hostility to all but a handful of political websites or conservative television personalities who praise him and labels everything else fake news. I'll talk about what I see as the silver lining in all of this. We don't have all the answers, but we're convinced we have some of them and convinced they can work. But we should also be clear about what's going on, because what's going on is an assault, a political assault and a technocratic assault on good journalism. And if we're going to confront it, we have to start to be clearer about what we do and why what we do matters, and what they do and why it matters, and how we're going to address it together. We should start with fake news. The good news is that much of the concern about fake news is, to put a fine point on it, fake. President Trump seized on rising alarm about actual fake news circulating on the internet, some of which clearly benefited his own candidacy, and turned it into a campaign against reliable providers of real news, against us, in other words. It is a strategy that comes directly out of the pages of Orwell or Kafka, and some surveys suggest that to some extent it's worked. Fake news, factually speaking, is a very specific and clearly identifiable thing. It is a piece of content that takes the form of a news story, but has little or no basis in reported fact. It is created by someone fully aware of its lack of factual basis, with the express purpose of going viral, either to achieve some political or social purpose, or to earn some money for its author, or both. We've all seen fake news, and it is a real problem. Pope Francis shocks the world, endorses Donald Trump for president, was shared 1 million times on Facebook. WikiLeaks confirmed Hillary Clinton sold weapons to ISIS, was shared 800,000 times on Facebook. Those are actual examples of fake news. There are a lot of other problems in the news media that have nothing to do with news being fake. News stories that contain information that turns out to be inaccurate are flawed, not fake. News stories documenting developments or events that later get overtaken by other developments or events do not become fake, even though they no longer fully describe the situation they were originally created to describe. Fake news is also not news or analysis or opinion or data that you or the President of the United States do not agree with. Partisan news outlets and the networks of friends and preferred providers that Facebook helps people construct for themselves can, of course, create a filter bubble. And that bubble can simulate a full enough sampling of what's really happening in the world that people may come to regard anything else as fake. But fake is not a synonym for the unfamiliar or the non-conforming. Fake news is a cousin of heavy spin, or what Kellyanne Conway, one of President Trump's advisors, has called alternative facts. But really, we're all accustomed to spin. Press releases, propaganda, or dubious statements from spokespeople are not new inventions. Properly identified and contextualized spin is part of the regular ecosystem of a connected world from which the news, in part, is constructed. And it's really not a cause for panic. So the first big step in confronting the malady of fake news is to stop promoting the idea that news, properly understood, is often fake. Viral content fraudulently concocted to look like news is clearly a problem, one that governments conducting elections and technology platforms that allow mass sharing of content need to do more to address. It is also worthy of more proactive journalistic effort to investigate and understand, something we've been trying to do much more of at the New York Times. But fake news is not a variation on news any more than hacking is a variation on web browsing. And emphasizing that, rather than acquiescing to the false notion that the news industry is riddled with fakes, is a necessary step, if only a first step, in rebuilding public confidence in what our journalists do. That is to thoroughly report, contextualize, and fairly present the news. Real high-quality news not only continues to have value, but has a great deal more value at a time when dominant technology platforms and the American president regularly blur fact and fiction. Which takes me to what my colleague Farhad Manjoo, who is a tech columnist at the Times, has referred to as the frightful five: Apple, Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. They pose a different and most likely a much longer lasting challenge. But there is also some evidence that by reaffirming the core values of good journalism, there's a way for quality media to navigate this new technological order. None of the tech giants, unlike the President of the United States, openly aspire to emasculate the news media. They are run by a very different species, techno-utopians, who profess to want to make the world a better place. They want to connect people everywhere with the information they desire, wherever it comes from, with more immediacy, more convenience, less interference, and less cost than was ever possible before. In recent years, we've largely accepted that vision, even thought of social media as a positive tool to advance democracy, and adjusted to the changes it's brought to our industry. We've sought to become savvy content providers within ecosystems these tech giants design. We've sought to master their algorithms, develop relationships with our readers wherever they come to us, and take advantage of the fact that the platforms offer new ways to connect far more consumers as close to us as Queens and as far as Queensland to journalism that we produce they might not otherwise see. And it has worked to a considerable extent. We're a different kind of media company, a nimbler, faster, more reader-centric media company as a result. But it would not be honest to claim that tech platforms have become a safe space for the Times or our peers, new or old. Partly, this is the familiar issue of how to make money. The dominance of Facebook and Google as platforms for advertisers has undercut the old business models that sustained print, digital, and broadcast media, and increasingly the world of entertainment. That poses an enormous and an ongoing threat to just about everyone who cannot, as the technology pundit Ben Thompson has said, aggregate supply and demand as efficiently as the tech platforms do. Of course, there is not a single traditional media company or entertainment company in the frightful five. None can now hope to rival them in any kind of aggregation contest. Yet there has been in recent months a palpable shift in thinking about the impact of Silicon Valley. What had been a broad acceptance of its orthodoxies of optimization and aggregation has given way to greater skepticism, healthy skepticism. We've had a taste of the dystopia that can come from removing most of the cost and most of the human beings from the gathering and distributing of news and information, and it's bitter. The risks of providing reams of personal data to tech giants accountable only to themselves have become clearer. Facebook's personalization algorithms and its recommendation engines, which power the Facebook news feed, are enormously powerful and enormously complex. They are also proprietary black boxes of coding subject only to the oversight of the company that owns it, which itself quite clearly does not fully comprehend its impact on billions of people around the world. Hate speech and pornography are available if you want it, and also if you don't. Algorithms can be used not only by quality media companies, but also by extremist groups. Advertisers of all sorts can anonymously buy traffic for secretive marketing campaigns that they may not dare put their name behind in other media. Identity theft has become rampant, and so are attempts by bad actors to undermine social stability and manipulate democratic elections. RT, the Russian propaganda network, developed the largest following of any media company on YouTube over the past few years. It earned recognition and special support from Google through the 2016 election until its videos were finally more carefully scrutinized. Facebook has only begun to acknowledge the impact Russian troll farms had on its platform. But it is already clear that content specifically designed to foment divisions in American life had phenomenal success, reaching hundreds of millions of users. Google and Facebook are run by smart people, and they undoubtedly have confidence that their algorithms will rise to this challenge as they've risen to others. They can be overhauled to better protect privacy, better screen content you don't want to see, identify and ban bad actors, and distinguish real from fake. Artificial intelligence is not going away. It will become a bigger part of all of our lives. But AI and tech platforms are just beginning to take seriously the idea that bad content circulating on mass platforms with total anonymity for its creators can have serious consequences. And that sorting out looks a little like what publishers and broadcasters do every day. This is a conflict for the tech world. Tech leaders want to be in the business of monetizing the distribution of other people's content, not in the business of creating or editing, which is effectively choosing good over bad. Their growth depends on being ubiquitous, accessible, and neutral. They do not want to be treated like media companies and held responsible for what their users post or their advertisers promote. At the same time, their ability to remain free of regulation may depend on being more discerning, trustworthy, and reliable. It is a conflict in mission that they have plainly yet to work out. There's a Canadian rock band called Rush that has a song named Free Will. Rush is very popular in Silicon Valley, but there's a lyric from Free Will that I wish people there would listen to. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. I promise not to sing that, but they got it right. Not altogether unlike the fake news problem. There's an opportunity for real news providers as tech giants grapple with this changing reality. What Silicon Valley thinks of as supply, what we call our journalism, is not all created equal. Some news is a commodity, but much of the news business adds value, doggedly chasing stories, uncovering new information, diligent fact-checking, careful editing, judgment and experience, brand and reputation that algorithms cannot easily detect, much less replicate. To put it another way, the world needs more real reporting, and robots don't report. We're fortunate at the New York Times to be controlled by a family, the Sulzberger family, now about to transition to its 5th generation of leadership. The family believes in journalism. They are not billionaires from other ventures who are investing in the news business for the first time. They're proprietors who have a deep conviction developed over more than 120 years that investing more than anyone else in making our core news product distinctive will see the company and its readers through the inevitable ups and downs of a volatile industry, and they've been right. Attacks on the press by the president, the fake news phenomenon, and the shift of eyeballs and ad dollars to tech platforms are serious challenges. Our publisher, Arthur Sulzberger Jr., and A.G. Sulzberger, the deputy publisher and his successor, have told us that we should put our boots on and jump into action, improve our product, refine our tactics, and cultivate a much larger audience nationally and globally than we once thought possible. But they've also used this moment to reflect carefully on what has made our journalism special and asked us to find fresh ways to communicate those core values to our readers. That means reporting harder, deeper, faster, and wider. It means using more of the proceeds from our Trump bump in digital subscriptions to invest in our newsroom. We're hiring at least 100 new journalists in 2017, investigative reporters in Washington, videographers, multimedia storytellers, economics and tax experts, an expanded technology team in China, and a pod of enterprise reporters in Europe. And we've been expanding bureaus and growth areas for us, like here in Sydney and Toronto and in London and back home in California. We've learned some important lessons about ourselves and our product as we delve into some new areas. About 18 months ago, as we and many of our peers were exploring how to expand our offerings in audio, we hired a talented young producer from the American public radio world, Lisa Tobin. We already had a number of podcasts, some of them moderately successful. But Lisa wanted to start from scratch. She said that many people had a sense of what the New York Times should read like. She wanted to figure out what it should sound like. Rather than figuring out how to recast ourselves in the mode of audio media, she was thinking about recasting audio to fit the mold of the New York Times. And she figured out that what the Times does is focus intensively on the biggest stories of the moment. Lisa called this a candy store for an audio producer. We already had a nearly limitless variety of great stories every day. We just needed a new way to tell them. That was the genesis of what we called The Daily. It sounds simple enough. It was anything but. A massive lift to produce a high-quality daily news podcast with expert soundscaping and live interviews, which sometimes required ripping up everything and starting over at 10 p.m. But what made it possible, aside from the hard work of Lisa's team, was that she had access to a newsroom of 1,400 people globally who were already chasing those stories, and with a little prodding, became guides to both the story of the day and the story behind the story of the day. The Daily is a big success. It's had more than 100 million streams since we launched it less than 6 months ago, and it's going to become a franchise. But the lesson goes beyond audio. Maybe it took us too long, but we figured out that the voice of God that once made our prose sound uniform and authoritative in print was holding us back. It sometimes caused us to edit out a sense of place, the obstacles and uncertainties of reporting, as well as the voice and the experience and the personality of our writers. And it's all of those things, along with the quality of the end product, that makes the Times unique. You can now see us embracing the story about the story in all parts of our report. When our Pulitzer Prize-winning foreign correspondent Ellen Barry finished her tour recently as bureau chief in New Delhi, she decided she'd make one final reporting trip to a village where she had done lots of reporting in the past and where there were still a few questions she wanted to ask. The headline on the story she wrote was, "How to Get Away with Murder in Small Town India." And the first paragraph read like this: "On my last week in India, I went to say goodbye to Jerahuddin Mawati, the chief of a small village where I had made a dozen or so reporting trips." From that unfolded a murder mystery that depended heavily on Ellen's particular style of writing, but also on a new consciousness about what it means to be an American foreign correspondent, covering a story that is clearly impacted by the act of covering it. And it's also just a great read. We've always treated investigative work as a major part of what we offer, but it is much more important now. Investigative reporting is by its nature proprietary. It's hard to do well and even harder to scale. But in this target-rich environment, it's rewarding, both for readers and for the news media that develop a strong reputation for delivering it. Investigative still means teams of reporters taking weeks or months to uncover something big. Teams like those that exposed a raft of sexual harassment cases and secret settlements that led to the downfall of two of the biggest personalities in American entertainment, Bill O'Reilly of Fox News and Harvey Weinstein, the film mogul. But investigative also needs to be infused into the daily rhythm of news gathering. Almost every big story has an investigative angle that someone on our staff is pursuing, especially these days in Washington. One of the biggest stories of the early Trump presidency were a series of New York Times exclusives on Trump's relationship with James Comey, the former FBI director, that unfolded over a couple of weeks. Mike Schmidt is mainly an investigative reporter, and his work depended on months of cultivating sources for an investigative project on the FBI. But the story of Trump's conflict with Comey came out in a flood of revelations, requiring the skills of a nimble beat reporter. A similar situation happened a few months later. Joe Becker, one of our most seasoned investigative reporters in New York, got a tip that Donald Trump Jr. met with a well-connected Russian lawyer during the height of the presidential campaign. That might have been an interesting one-off scoop, but Joe turned it into a multi-day string of exclusives on who attended the meeting, why it was held, and why the White House continued to alter its explanation of the event. That kind of news will never be a commodity. Many news organizations have struggled to figure out how to use video as a tool for digital storytelling. We're among them. When is video better than text to convey big news? What's the right length for video on mobile? Is video better embedded in articles or standing on its own? Should we focus more on program shows or documentaries or cooking videos? We ruled out cat videos, but tried just about everything else. It took time, but as in audio, we feel we've worked our way towards something that feels native to the news culture of the times, while pushing the boundaries of storytelling and video. One example is the work of Malachi Brown, our forensic videographer. He and his team have developed an expertise at mixing our own work with crowdsourced video and audio from major news events. It comes from bystanders and eyewitnesses as well as official sources like police, military, or security cameras. Malachi uses satellite mapping to determine precise locations in the images. He then reconstructs events second by second, often pixel by pixel, providing a detailed timeline and an engaging narrative that's often more detailed and quite different than the version offered by the authorities. His most recent effort involved a mass shooting in Las Vegas. It was a marriage of classic investigative sleuthing, the wisdom of the crowd, and cutting-edge video techniques. It offered a new and gripping account of how the shooting unfolded, how the concert crowd experienced it, and how police and hotel security responded and communicated, or in some cases failed to respond and communicate in the effort to stop the shooting. Finally, I wanted to say something about partisanship, or more exactly, about non-partisanship. In this political climate, there's tremendous pressure on the New York Times and many other media to become part of the opposition to Donald Trump. That pressure comes partly from our own readers. They want us to more forcefully confront a president they see as a threat to democracy and American power. The other side also wants us to become the opposition. That would suit their narrative that there's no such thing as a nonpartisan media or nonpartisan facts, only support or opposition to their positions. Some media companies see it as in their journalistic or business interests to more formally take sides in this struggle. We have decided it is not in our journalistic or business interests to do that. We're convinced there's still a big audience for nonpartisan journalism in the United States and around the world, and that the polarization of much of the media makes that potential audience larger. Moreover, we see partisanship as the enemy of good journalistic practice. The discipline of skepticism, skepticism even about many of the things our own journalists might take for granted, leads to better stories. It forces us to listen more carefully. It makes us more aware of changes in culture and society. The key word is empathy. Empathy means considering perspectives other than your own. It's a fundamentally human value that helps us, and ultimately our readers, to become smarter and more understanding. It also makes for compelling journalism. Farrah Stockman is a national desk correspondent for The Times. I've never had a conversation with Farrah about her political views, but she eagerly took on an assignment to understand the fault lines on trade that were part of Donald Trump's appeal to many voters in American Rust Belt states. She spent some months getting to know a steel worker in Indiana. The article she wrote, "Becoming a steel worker liberated her, then her job moved to Mexico," is a deeply human and revealing look at the social and economic issues that have transformed the politics of the United States. You begin to understand why a single mother of two who worked her way up to a 25-hour job on the male-dominated factory floor of a steel ball bearing plant, and who once voted for Barack Obama, ended up supporting Donald Trump in 2016. It is the kind of story that newsrooms full of people who have already decided what's right and what's wrong may not bother to produce. In an era of instant articles and breaking news alerts, it often pays to slow things down, ask some hard questions, and then just listen. And I want to thank you for listening to me.